Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to The Tale of the Trilobites. In today's video, we shall be continuing our coverage of all the orders of Trilobites. This time, we shall be covering the large-headed Harpetida. We shall discuss the history of the group, study their inner relationships, both to other Trilobites and within themselves, the diversity to be found within the group, the ecology or how these creatures live as actual animals, and in the end, what may have actually happened to them and why are they extinct.
Oh!
Alright, so the first harpids to be discovered and scientifically recognized was Harpetides in 1846 by Heinrich Ernst Beirich, a German paleontologist notable for coining the term Oligocene for the period between the Eocene and Miocene. Shortly afterwards, it would be thrown in as a suborder Harpetina in the absolute taxonomic dumpster that was Pedicoparida. Now, I covered that group back in episode 4, so check that out if you'd like to learn more about them, especially their taxonomic convulsions. Such would be the status quo until the 1990s, when research by Richard Forte, a noted British paleontologist, Dr. Malte Ebach, and Dr. Kenneth McNamara, in a paper revision of the group, found that in addition to getting rid of a lot of dubious genera and subcategories like Solenopteroplura, found that the group lacked the rostral plate and have marginal sutures, two features that made it clear they were not Pedicoparida, and thus raised them to the status of their own order. Stuff has since been mostly stable, though there has been some contention among the basal family Entomaspididae. Some argue that certain genera don't fit, others say it's a paraphyletic group that serves as a transition from the earlier Pedicoparida to the Harpetida. But as of writing this video, it's still considered valid, and I will treat it as such, though bear in mind this could change in the future. Now that we have covered the history of this group study, let's go into the diagnostic traits of this group, so you can potentially identify them should you happen to find one in the field. Alright, so the Harpida are actually one of the easier groups to identify, as barring one exceptions we will discuss later, they all generally have the same appearance/body plan. Firstly, starting with their cephalonic head. By the way, if you want to have a better understanding of some of the terms used for the anatomy of trilobites, please go back and check out episode 2 of this series to get an idea. Though at the same time, harpids have a lot of their own terms, so you can still watch this if you'd like to learn about that. Anyway, back on topic, the head has their facial sutures are extremely marginal, except in their most basal forms, and generally have very small eyes, though none of them lost their eyes entirely. Their head is expanded by the presence of an external rim and girdle, leading to an appearance that sort of resembles those of the modern horseshoe crab head, and they really are distinct among trilobites for this. Going down to the thorax or body, it generally consists of 12 or more segments, usually fairly unremarkable except for being flattened and having broad axial furrows. The pygidium or tail is usually again rather unremarkable, being usually triangular in shape, and usually smaller than the head, due to the head being so big. I think you'll have a very easy time recognizing this order of trilobites compared to some of the others I've discussed, but as always, please contact your local museum should you happen to find one in your local area, as they can help you more on identifying local trilobites than I can. Now that we've finished their diagnostic traits, let us cover their diversity to be found within the group for what it's worth. Alright, so the Harpetida are unfortunately the least diverse of the trilobites, both in terms of overall numbers of genera, for which there are only 30, and in terms of their subcategories, consisting of only 3 families: the basal Entomaspididae, the Harpetidae, and the Harpedidae. Note that there are sometimes the middle family, Harpetida, is spelled Harpida, but this is not considered valid as that family name also applies to snails, and it seems they got that name first, which is kind of a shame, but, just saying, don't use that spelling. Back on topic, the first of these families are the Entomaspidae. These guys are distinguished by the presence of less developed facial sutures that are transitioning from the state seen in earlier pedicoparids, such as the family Etioporidae, which, in my opinion, are likely the ancestor to the Harpidas, or at least resemble what they would have looked like. But regardless, this family itself contained only 2 genera, those being Bicandaspis and Entomaspis. The next family, the Harpedidae, are a little more diverse, containing 11 genera. These include Harpedes, Harpedades, Metaharpedides, Paraharpedides, Pisemomyopsis, and most notably Dictyocephalides, which is the only Harpet trilobite to be a notable departure from the standard body plan seen in the group, its head being not so large and its body being long and spiny. Lastly, we have the largest family, the Harpetidae, which contains 17 genera, including Lioharpes, Harpies, Hibertia, Eoharpes, Dunningtasia, Kitanio, Scoloharpes, and Palaeoharpes. Overall, the diversity of the group is a far cry from some of the other orders of trilobites we've discussed. I still think it's interesting as a contrast, as they simply didn't need to diversify as much. With that, let us now go on to the ecology of the group, aka how they might have lived as actual creatures, and seeing how their morphology may have impacted such things. Alright, so the ecology of this group, much more than others, is actually fairly solidly known, due in part to their highly distinctive morphological conservatism. Nearly all harpetids are believed to have engaged in filter feeding, which is a feeding technique that I discussed in the last installment where I discussed the Trinoculata, which, you might want to watch if you'd like to learn more about some other unusual trilobites, but the harpids, alongside the trinoculaids and some protids, all had rather huge heads, which, when laid level with the ground, would have held their bodies off the seafloor, then using their legs to kick up sediment, which the harpid would have then filtered food from. While they were not as efficient at it compared to, say, the Trinoculata due to lacking pits, they're also more long-lasting and widespread, with representatives in both shallow waters and deep sea habitats. The oddball Dictyocephalides likely had a radically different lifestyle that we can only speculate on. While perhaps not the most glamorous lifestyle, the Harpeta no doubt played a major role in a nutrient cycling, sort of like how modern horseshoe crabs do it, but at a much larger rate as they had a higher population than modern horseshoe crabs do. Now that we've finished with our ecology, let us move on to their evolutionary history and answer the question of what exactly happened to them and why they may have faded into extinction. Alright, so the Harpeta emerged in the Upper Cambrian right around the same time as the Trinoculata and seem to have emerged from the Pedicoparida. During this time, they were fairly minor parts of the trilobite fauna. The end Cambrian extinction event seems to have not really impacted them as much as it did other groups like the Coryneoxochida and Agnacida, both of which were pretty well wrecked by the end. The Harpetida went on into the Ordovician to achieve their greatest number and diversity, though it should be said that they were still never as diverse as some of the other groups of trilobites and were still a relative minor part of the fauna overall. Still, this was the high point of them, as they had many shallow and deep water forms. The end Ordovician mass extinction wiped out the last of the agnostids, pedicoparids, and even the formerly dominant asaphids. It did impact the harpids mostly by wiping out their shallow water forms, but their deep water forms still thrived and went through the following Silurian while the Trinoculata faded into extinction, with some harpids even partially recolonizing shallow waters. This was likely due to them not being as specialized as the Trinoculata, with them still possessing functional, if small, eyes. They were just a little more flexible than them, and while yes, by this point, they had mostly abandoned the shallow waters, they continued into the Devonian, living as they always had in the abyss. Sadly, the close of the Devonian saw their end. Firstly, it seems that these guys, due to their specialized feeding apparatuses, did best in regions with large open sandy areas, and generally seemed to mostly disappear from regions if, say, corals or crinoids choked out these areas. But while this may have been a factor for the decline in some specific regions, like what is today Morocco, it should be said that this doesn't really apply globally. Instead, it was, as might be familiar to you at this point, the Devonian mass extinction event that ended their long lineage. So, the Devonian mass extinction event was actually two events, the Kelwesian event and the Hengenberg event, both named after regions the first evidence for such things were discovered. The causes for these extinctions are disputed, but seem to have been a combination of global cooling, volcanism, and the spread of the first large land plants, which would break down the formerly barren rock into soil that would then erode out down rivers into the ocean. Said oceans were not used to such a massive increase in nutrients at that point, and this led to massive explosive spike in algal blooms that would soak up all the oxygen, leading to eutrophication, poisoning the shallows, wiping out all of the archaic jawless fish, the armored placoderms, many eurypterids, as well as many of the acanthodians and pretty much all of the shallow water dwelling trilobites except the Protida. But you may be asking, how come the deep sea harpids were died out? As, they were, not in the shallows, and while they were not directly impacted by such things, after all, they did live in the deep and they had survived similar extinctions in the past. No, the reason they died out was due to their babies. That were their greatest weaknesses. Harpids, much like all other trilobites except the Protida, had planktonic larvae that floated in the upper water column, and as such they were impacted by the lack of oxygen, killing them before they could reach adulthood. Kind of a very sad ending that, basically led to all non-protid trilobites going extinct, who managed to avoid this fate due to their larvae being larger and more developed and basically settling on the seafloor soon after emerging. And sadly, in the end, the harpids just couldn't survive and faded into extinction. Overall, what can we learn from the Harpetida? Well, we learned that just because a group is not as diverse as others, there's still value in them, and one can be quite successful at it. We also learned the importance of protecting children, as they're the future, and failing to do so will lead to a swift and utter downfall. I'm the Dark Master, and if you liked this video, like it, but if you loved it, consider liking and subscribing, and join me next time as we shall be covering a far more diverse order of trilobites, the Phacopida. Have a wonderful day, and take care.
Sorry man for feeling the way I do. Oh yeah, open wide and they'll shove in the meaning of life. Oh yeah, not for me, I'll do it on my own.